This video is sponsored by Card Kingdom. You can visit their store by using my referral link in the description below. Hi everyone, I'm Nizzanotes, and today is Saturday, and that means it's time for another edition of Nizzanotes, my weekly vlog series where I talk about limited Magic. By the time this video goes up, the new limited format will have been on Arena for a couple of days, and that format is, of course, Alchemy Horizons Baldur's Gate, and that's what we're going to talk about today. We may talk about this format a significant amount over the next few weeks, and we also might not. It kind of depends on how much people are interested in it. I did a full set review and everything for it, and, didn't get the normal kind of views that it would, probably because it's not a paper set, and that would make sense. But I kind of have to do content that's more likely to be viewed and stuff. So, it kind of depends how this video does. If I had to guess, I'd say it's not going to do great compared to a more general limited topic. But that is what we're going to talk about today. And in particular, I want to talk about the best commons and uncommons in the set in each color. So I'm going to talk about the best uncommon and the best 3 commons. We do this every time a new set comes out. It's sort of a Cliff's Notes version of my set review. You can, of course, watch the whole set review, which has me discussing, literally every card in the set. But if you don't have time to do that and you want a sort of quicker rundown, that's what this video can do for you. So let's start with white. I think white's 3rd best common is You Hear Something on Watch. That's a card that comes directly from Forgotten Realms. It's nice because it's modal, and, the removal effect it has is pretty good. It's situational, but it's cheap enough. This is a card, it's kind of funny because, it can also pump your whole board, which might make you think this is a card you want in a more aggressive deck, but because the removal part of the card only works on attacking creatures, it really isn't something that more aggressive decks in the format are super pumped about, because that kind of removal is the kind of thing you want if you're trying to make a game go long. That said, it is still a pretty good common. I mean, it does a good job of dealing with creatures efficiently, and sometimes the mass pump effect matters. It's not a common you really want to be first picking or anything, but the first copy of it is a nice pickup in this format. I think the 2nd best white common is Blessed Hippogriff. This would be a pretty good common even without the adventure. Anytime we have one of these sort of reasonably statted flyers who can give flying to something else when it attacks, it ends up being a pretty good limited card. I mean, that's just a nice effect to have. It really helps aggressive decks out in terms of pushing damage through, and it's fine in less aggressive decks too. So adding the adventure to the mix is a big deal. I mean, it's also a cheap adventure. It is a somewhat situational one, but one thing I like about adventures, normally I'm like, I don't like a card that just makes a creature indestructible. It's too situational. Well, that matters a lot less here, because you no longer have to trade 1 for 1 to feel like you're doing it with this, because you're also going to get a creature later, and a pretty good one. The times where you do manage to trade 1 for 1, either by blanking removal or turning a trade into your opponent losing their creature, and then you cast the Hippogriff, you're getting a 2 for 1, and that's pretty powerful. And I do think the Hippogriff climbs into sort of the lower area of being a card you pick highly, and maybe even as a first pick in a really weak pack, but it's a very nice common. And I think white's best common, and it's not particularly close, is Priest of Ancient Lore. This is another one that was in Forgotten Realms. This may remind you, like if you didn't play Forgotten Realms, it may remind you of Inspiring Overseer, the insane common from the last set, New Capenna. It costs the same and has the same into the battlefield ability, but it doesn't have flying, so it's not quite as game warping, but it is really strong. I mean, it sets you up 2 for 1s, it gains you life, which the green-white deck likes, and it has a powerful into the battlefield ability, which the blue-white deck likes. So not only is it just really good in a vacuum, there's 2 decks in the format that can generate extra value with this already very powerful common. And obviously, you first pick Priest of Ancient Lore, you're probably going to do it a significant amount because it's stronger than most cards in the set, and it's a common, so you'll just see it a lot. And I think white's best uncommon is Sea Tower Imprisonment. This is an excellent removal spell that also adds to the board. Another comparison to the last set, this is sort of like Sleeping with the Fishes, but white. And it's better for the most part because it also shuts down basically everything the creature can do in terms of static abilities and stuff like that. And you also get a 2-1, and it's a 2-1 with double team, which is like the amount of mana this thing costs. The 2-1 you get out of it is a 2-mana card in the set. And so you're paying 2 extra mana here to also basically completely remove a creature, and you're getting the 2-1 with double team, which is insane. So It's interesting. A lot of the best uncommons are going to be cards with Specialize, and there are some good ones in white, don't get me wrong, but I think Sea Tower Imprisonment is better than all of them in white. Yeah, it's just a great removal spell. You'll be very happy to pick these up. And obviously, very early as a first pick. This isn't just a card where you're like, yeah, I guess I'll take it with a first pick. It's a card where you're really happy to take it with a first pick. It's that good. In blue, I think the third best common is Soul Knife Spy. This was a solid common in Forgotten Realms, and it is here too. If it just hits your opponent once, you're in great shape, and, it's a card your opponent basically has to trade with when you attack with it if they can, and forcing them to do that is itself a decent thing to have around. And there's also lots of ways you can make it evasive so that you can trigger its ability more easily. It's not something you want to first pick at all, but it is a high quality common and one you'll play like 2 to 3 of pretty happily in most blue decks. So yeah, I think the second best blue common is Charmed Sleep. Pretty good removal spell every time we see it. It's not quite Sea Tower Imprisonment, of course, but it does do a good job of shutting down most of what a creature can do efficiently. For both the Imprisonment and Charmed Sleep and other aura-based things, it'll be interesting to see how much of a problem it is that there's sacrifice stuff going on, although it's more of a sub-theme in Black-Red than the main theme. And then there's also a lot of blinking going on within Blue-White. And if those things are really prevalent, these might be a little worse than I'm expecting, but I see Charmed Sleep as being pretty good right now. And I think the best blue common is Young Blue Dragon. Adventures are strong. That's been established, in the past by Lorwyn. And this is one that's always going to give you a 2-for-1. Neither side is that impressive. And that's the thing you have to remember. In Limited, a lot of times, mana efficiency matters. But when you have one card that can give you 2 cards, and one of them really adds to the board, it suddenly doesn't matter as much how much mana you're spending. It matters that you're generating more value than your opponent, and that's what you're doing here. And Young Blue Dragon is a card I think you can first pick. It also has a useful creature type, which of course matters. For the best blue uncommon, I struggled a little bit trying to pick one. I really love Juvenile Mist Dragon, and I always love this kind of card, this blue creature that adds to the board while messing up the opponent's board either by bouncing something or freezing something down. That's always great, and this is a really good iteration of that as a 5-mana 4/3 flyer that does it in a format where you can blink creatures. But I think, while it is really, really good, I do think there's one uncommon that's better in blue, and that is Vol Eager Scholar, one of these specialized creatures. So, a 3-mana 2/1 that can loot, already a card you basically always play. And then this has the massive upside of Specialize, so after you've looted a few times and you transform it, then you remove these study counters and it gets crazy. It just gives you amazing effects depending on how many of those you removed. And that's just really strong. So you're not always going to get to that point. Vol does die to many things, pretty much everything. But it's usually going to generate enough value for you as a 3-mana 2/1 that can loot that if you don't get to specialize it, it's not the end of the world. And if you do specialize it, well, it's basically going to feel like a bomb. And this is an uncommon that will feel like a bomb. So, it has a lower floor maybe than the Juvenile Mist Dragon, but it has a much higher ceiling. And for me, that's why I have it as the best uncommon in blue. All right, moving on to black now. I think black's third best common is probably Sewer Plague. And I actually think black has some really good commons. I think all 3 of the ones I'm going to talk about here, you can first pick. I think Sewer Plague is sort of in the lower level of premium removal. It kills most, 2/2s, kills all 2/2s right away, and then it will eventually kill pretty much everything. The fact that it is perpetual kind of matters too. I mean, there is graveyard stuff in the set, and that thing is so, perpetually weakened, so your opponent getting it back makes it a worse card. At number 2, I have Sepulchre Ghoul. This thing is back, and it's got 1 more toughness, so, that's pretty strong. It's particularly good in a black-red deck where you can steal stuff and sack it, but a 2-mana 2/2 as a baseline that can threaten to become a 4/4 every time it does anything is a really good card anyway. When it was a 2/1, you could set up a lot more situations where you didn't feel so bad. Like you could stick a 1/1 token in front of it and they had to sack something to save it. Well, that's not the case anymore. You have to put something more real in front of it, and now when they sack a thing, it's much more likely they can save it. I mean, 1 toughness is a huge difference. So Sepulchre Ghoul is great. I could see it ending up being the best common, but I do think they weakened the steal sacrifice element of the deck enough that maybe he's not going to be quite as good as he was in Forgotten Realms. which is funny because they made his stats better, but they also took away the better threat and effect that we had in that set. And I think Black's best common is going to be Grim Bounty. This is one that can move around a little bit. If the format is as fast as Forgotten Realms was, when we really get a feel for it, it might not be this good because it is a 4-mana sorcery. And if the things you have to kill in this format are frequently cheaper than that, it's going to be rough. But it does kill anything, and it gives you a treasure. Treasure is the black-red theme, and it answers anything, gives you back a mana. That's pretty good. But I could see, even this potentially, depending on the speed of the format, Grim Bounty dropping to number 3 here, then the Plague, then Sepulchre Ghoul, or some other configuration. But I think all three of them are kind of comparable at this point in the format, and they're quite good. All right, the best uncommon. In the end here, I went with Viconia, Night Singer's Disciple. I also sort of considered Servok, the other uncommon specialized creature. And in the end, though, I went with Viconia. A 2-mana 2/3 that hates on the graveyard is a card you would basically always play, especially in a format where there is real graveyard stuff going on. And then it's sort of like, the blue specialized card we looked at. If this never specializes, it is a pretty good card. And if it does specialize, it's going to feel like a bomb because you just generate so much value. In the case of Viconia, you get to do something with one of the cards you exiled. So it takes some setup. But because the floor of this card is so reasonable, I think I'm perfectly fine with having to set things up for Viconia and then, specialize her for only 2 mana into something that's bigger and gives you a free card, basically. Pays you back the card you spend on specialize and then some. All right, moving on to red now. I think red's third best common is Hobgoblin Captain. That's right, this card is back. It's a great 2-drop that frequently will have first strike in the very early game, difficult to block. They did make sure there were more like 1/4s in this set than there were in the original Forgotten Realms. So it's probably not going to be quite as good, but, still going to be quite good. Hard to deal with, hard to block pretty much all game long. A 2-mana 3/1 that stays relevant pretty much all game is pretty nice. I think red's second best common is Young Red Dragon. So like Young Blue Dragon, this is an adventure dragon, and in this case, you just get a treasure, so you're not really generating 2 full cards worth of value here. It's not as good as the blue dragon, I don't think, but it generates treasure, which means this thing can count as fixing in your deck and help you with treasure synergies, and you can even use the treasure it makes to ramp into it, and play it on turn 3 as a 3-mana 3/2 flyer, which sure, it can't block, whatever. But it is like that's a pretty significant body that early that will usually chip in for significant damage. So it looks pretty good to me overall. I don't think you want to really take the captain or the dragon as first picks in drafts, or really even before like pick 4, probably. But we'll see how things pan out. And red's best common is Dragon's Fire. This was true in Forgotten Realms. This was the best red common, and it's the best red common here. And it's probably even better here because this format has 3 different dragon color pairs, and the original Forgotten Realms does not have any dragon tribal, really, as a thing. So it's probably even better here. It's, at worst, it's 2 mana to do 3 to something. You'll be able to do 4, 5, 6 with it with regularity in this format. This is another color where I sort of struggled to pick one uncommon. In the end, I picked Battlecry Goblin, but I did have Ambergris in here. This is one of the specialized creatures, the one that can sort of reload your hand and then gives you some big payoffs for discarding. In the end, I decided Ambergris, in terms of the setup and in terms of actually doing something, is kind of harder to get the most value out of than Battlecry Goblin, which is just, this was red's best uncommon in Forgotten Realms, so they reprinted red's best common and uncommon from that set, both of which were quite powerful, and yeah, so, red's looking pretty strong in this set too when that's the case. But yeah, the Goblin, it's a great thing to play on turn 2, but if you draw it in the late game, unlike most 2-drops where it's like, well, at least I'm adding to the board, I can trade with something. With Battlecry Goblin, you draw it, you play it, you tap all your mana, and you attack, and it's significant. Like, your opponent has to deal with this Battlecry Goblin. If you have other goblins around, it gets even worse for them. And it's scaling like that is what makes it so excellent. So in the end, I did go with Battlecry Goblin over one of the uncommon specialized creatures. Both are really good uncommons, though. Battlecry Goblin, by the way, probably better than 90% of the rares or mythics in the set, so keep that in mind. And in green, the 3 best commons, this is another one where I think all 3 of these commons are things you can first pick. They're pretty strong. And I think the 3rd best one is probably Underseller Myconid. Man, like, you know, the first time you read this, I mean, for me anyway, I read it and I was like, okay, 3 mana 1/2 that makes a 1/1 and can tap for mana. That's pretty good. But then I realized you also get a 1/1 when it dies. So I kind of like that because a lot of the time you play these sort of awkwardly statted mana dorks, like the Myconid, and you're like, you know, they're probably going to kill this before I get any mana out of it. And that's true here still, but you get 2 1/1s out of it as your fail case. And that's pretty impressive. And then the upside is that you add these 2 bodies to the board and this ramps and fixes for you. It's a really good common. And I think, you know, I can see myself first picking this in some weak packs and certainly picking it up like pick 2 or 3 pretty happily. Next up, I've got Band Together. So this is a nice removal spell. You know, it gets around some of the problems we see with other fight spells. It's not even really a fight spell because your creature doesn't take any damage. But the fact that you can use up to 2 creatures to damage one of your opponents means you can take down bigger things with smaller creatures. And it also means if your opponent can answer in some way by destroying one of the creatures you're targeting, you sort of have insurance that you're still able to kill the creature you're targeting. And then, I think the best green common is Owlbear. This one's a reprint. 5 mana, 4/4 trample, draws you a card. I'm in for it. The one thing about it is you don't want too many 5 mana creatures. So, you know, you can't like jam. I mean, you could probably play 4 of these if they're only 5 mana creatures, I guess. But it does have that problem. I could really see these 3 shifting around too. I do think they're green's 3 best commons, but the order they ultimately end up in, you know, it's going to shake out one way or the other. And it'll be interesting to see. And I think green's best uncommon is Druid of the Emerald Grove. And, you know, again, I sort of looked at the specialized creatures here, the uncommon ones, and they're good. But I can't get over how good Druid of the Eternal Grove is here. You know, it's 4 mana for a 2/2 that at worst searches you up 2 lands and puts them in your hand. And that already, like, is pretty good. That'd be like a B-, I think, in most formats, which means it's a card you can first pick sometimes. And then it has the upside of, more often than not, at least letting you put one of those lands into play. And sometimes you get to put both. Don't count on it. But basically, this is Cultivate staple to a 2/2 or better more than half the time. And the other half of the time, you know, it's just searching you up 2 lands. But that's still really good. It fixes for you really well. It even lets you enable double splashes, and that's pretty cool. I just think it gives you too much value. I mean, it's, you know, it's just lands, but it's still a 3-for-1 most of the time, and it just looks really good. I mean, if you're the most aggressive deck ever, you probably don't want this thing. But every other, I mean, you're going to first pick it when you see it and see if you can make it work, and it's not that hard to make it work. You just don't want to be crazy aggressive with it. But yeah, it looks great. Druid of the Eternal Grove does, or Emerald Grove. So overall, I mean, the power level of this set is pretty high, significantly higher than most limited formats, and that makes sense because it's, you know, we've got this wacky alchemy stuff going on. So there are lots of nice commons and uncommons, and the format, you know, should be pretty fun. So yeah, lots of good commons and uncommons. So we'll close things out with a Crack-a-Pack. This may be the only Crack-a-Pack we do for this format, depending on how people watch and react to this video, but we'll do one now, and as usual, I'll talk about every card in the pack, how I feel about it in the format at this point, and then say what I would first pick. Okay, so here's our pack. We've got Arcane Archery as our first common. It's a nice little trick. I mean, it's the kind of trick that can find lethal out of nowhere, but what really sells me on it is the fact that you get a boon, which is almost worth a whole card on its own, I think. So the boon is pretty nice. You don't want to first pick it. I mean, you know, it's still a trick. You'll play one of them in like most of your aggressive green decks, but you don't go after it early. Dread Lenorm is up next. I do like this thing a reasonable amount. I mean, green's commons are really deep because I think this is a card that sort of is in the vicinity of the 3 commons we talked about, mostly because it has a trick on one side, which again, you know, I'm not usually a fan of 4 mana tricks, but when the trick is stapled to a creature you can play later in the game, it's a whole other thing. And it's a trick that's pretty flexible. You can use it to run over a creature. It gives a permanent boost to your creature, and it also gives hexproof, so you can use it to dodge removal. So it's pretty good. And yeah, right now would be what I would first pick over Arcane Archery. We have Young Blue Dragon next, though, and this is a common that made our list, and I think I like it more than Dreadlenorm. In the end, it's easier to generate the 2-for-1. It's not as good as like a finisher or anything, but you know, it gives you a decent draw effect and then a decent flyer. So I think that's what we're on now. Sylvan Shepherd next, you know, mediocre common. If you have reasons to value gaining life, gets a little better. And I mean, you'll play it, but it gets cut a lot too. Spiked Pit Trap, not very good. It wasn't last time around and it isn't here. Gray Slot is interesting. I think this card is going to be a really nice common for the black-green deck in the format and pretty horrible for everyone else. So it's really not the kind of card you have to go after early. Like if you end up in black-green, say you open this pack and you end up in black-green in the end, this is, you know, like you're just taking the best cards and they happen to be black and green, and then this wheels and you're like, okay, I guess I'll take it, because that's what's going to happen. Nobody else wants it. You know, when you can consistently make it a 4-1 with Menace and Death Touch, it's good. If you can't, it's bad. I mean, that's basically all there is to it. A Knoll Hunter, this is another really good green common that's kind of in the vicinity, I think. It was a really good green common in Forgotten Realms. I feel like this format has the means to be a little bit slower, and thus, like, powerful 2-drops aren't quite as good. But, you know, I guess Knoll Hunter is a card that could crack into the top 3 green commons if the format ends up being sort of a clone of Forgotten Realms, which hopefully it doesn't shake out that way. Celestial Unicorn is next. This is a solid common payoff for gaining life, but not really a thing you go after with the first pick. Wizened Zerai, I guess, is how you pronounce that. You know, it's an okay 2-drop. It gives a perpetual -2/-0 when it gets blocked. Don't love it. You know, I would like it a lot more, and in my set review, I actually thought you could block with it and do that, which would be way better, but you can't. It's only when it gets blocked, and it's a 2-mana 2/1, so, you know, there's everything can block it, and most of it will just trade with it and stay alive anyway. Although, actually, I guess the way it's worded, the thing gets weaker. And it's funny, because I was thinking I'd overrated it, but now that I'm thinking about it, it's a block trigger. So I got that wrong in the set review, entirely wrong, because that means that if your opponent blocks with like a 2/2, it becomes a 0/2. That's actually a much better 2-drop than I thought. Is it one of Blue's best commons? No, but it kind of reminds me of the 2-mana 2/1 that the black one from, I'll put it on the screen, but a few sets ago that gave -1/-1 to things that blocked it. That's actually pretty legit. I mean, it's going to be hard to block early. It's actually like an aggressive blue 2-drop. Still not what we take here. It's definitely Young Blue Dragon, but that is better than I expected. Dragon's Fire, pretty good removal spell. You know, I had it as Red's best common. It is what we would take now. It's just premium removal with very real upside. Monk of the Open Hand is our first uncommon. Not super exciting. You know, if you played on turn 1, it's not that hard to get it up to like a 3/3 just by doing stuff, but it's a pretty useless card by the later stages of the game, and that's a problem. So still Dragon's Fire. We do have a specialized creature here. It's a Laura Rogue Companion. Wow. These next 3 cards are all blue specialized cards. So Allura is not amazing. You know, she does sort of slot into the blue-black deck, which has lots of creatures that give you something when they hit the opponent. And she slots pretty well into the blink deck because she bounces things to your hand. But she does both of them so clunkily, you know, because of the way it works. Like, the creature that hits your opponent doesn't return to your hand until the end step, so it's not like you can hit them, return it to your hand, and cast it again. You have to wait a whole turn to do it. And similarly, if you want to hit your opponent with one of these triggers, making the thing unblockable is nice, but bouncing it to your hand, not so much. I mean, it definitely is a nice card, but you'll only play it in specific decks. All right, next up we have Vol. I had this as Blue's best uncommon. I think it's one of the best uncommons in the set. It just does so much when it specializes, and it's already such a good card. It is what we would take now. But then we also have a rare specialized creature, Imoen, who is a 2-mana 2/1 with specialized 5. It costs less if you get more instants and sorceries in your graveyard. And then once she transforms, she becomes completely unblockable and gains a trigger that when she hits your opponent, you can exile an instant or sorcery card from your graveyard and get some extra value. It's kind of build-aroundy. Because you're not always going to have enough instants and sorceries to consistently do that stuff, but I mean, your typical limited deck, by the time she specializes, will have an instant or sorcery in the graveyard, so you'll at least get the first trigger, and they're all powerful. They all do really powerful things. So I think I like Amoen in the end. It is a little awkward that I think the second best card in this pack is also blue, and that does matter to some extent. Like, it's something to sort of keep in the back of your mind, because also Young Blue Dragon is a pretty good blue card, and so is Allura. Like, this is a really good blue pack. So you might see blue end up, the next two people may take blue cards out of this pack, and if they do, well, never mind. Dragon's Fire's in the pack at least, so that should... And I think Dragon's Fire, is it better than Vol? No, I don't think so. I think I would take Vol over it. So at least only the second best card is blue. So maybe it's not as much of a problem, but, look at the signals after you take a card like this, and if you're never seeing blue cards again, you probably need to jump ship, but I think it's worth taking Amoen in the end anyway. It's just so powerful. So that's our first Crack-a-Pack of the format. Maybe our last Crack-a-Pack. Let me know, in the comments if you want to see more Forgotten Realms content in the Nizzanotes videos, or if you'd rather see more general topics about Limited. I mean, to some extent, I'll know from how this gets viewed and how this gets disliked. There's a subsection of people who just dislike everything that is Alchemy in the title, so have to account for that. But yeah, so that does it for this week's Nizzanotes. I'll be back next weekend with another one. If you enjoyed this video, please like it and share it, and that way other people are more likely to see it. If you want to see my set review for this set, you should see the playlist on your screen shortly. And if you want to make sure you see future videos, subscribe, turn on notifications. And if you want to go the extra mile in supporting the channel, you can on Patreon or by becoming a YouTube member. Thanks for watching.